Sharp turns of fate, career changes, and the constant search for oneself. It's like a test of inner resilience. And every time the world changes and everything around us shifts, we try to hold on to some kind of support or search for new meanings. Today we are talking about this and much more with Ms. Larysa Didkovska. Ms. Larysa is a candidate of psychological sciences, rector of the Ukrainian Free University in Munich, and also the president of the Ukrainian Association of Gestalt Therapy. Welcome, Ms. Larysa.
Thank you. I am glad to be with you, glad to once again share some knowledge that people might find useful later on.
Ms. Larysa, you have often spoken about the importance of the so-called intellectual volitional mechanism or regulator. And for me, it's like an internal steering wheel or a kind of inner compass that helps one navigate during turbulent times. How would you describe or characterize a person's ability to act in such a difficult time?
That is a very, very good question because we have two components. In general, a human being, as I always say fundamentally, is a biopsychosocial creature. Yes, we have our biological component, and we are living beings, we are Homo sapiens intelligent beings, but still, we are creatures. Even Aristotle said that we are social animals. So these are the two components. Biological is clear, but then there are the psychosocial ones. Social means how we interact with the society around us, how it has shaped us, the world we grew up in, the world in which we became ourselves, the micro-society, our family environment, the macro-society, the country, the world around us, the people walking on the streets, and so on. And the psychological component, and here we have individual psychological characteristics, because this includes temperament, character, and the way we respond to various events. And so if we talk about why intellectual and volitional control is important, it's what regulates all our desires, intentions, needs, their realization and their satisfaction. Because there are already two words in it. One word is intellect, right? That is, it's the level of our intellectual development, our IQ, our awareness and critical thinking. And the second word is will, because it's not enough to be just a rational being, but completely lacking in willpower. And then intelligence alone won't be enough for this regulation. But if everything is fine, if there is this balance between the influence of the mind and the influence of willpower, the ability to stop yourself before temptations, to organize your own safety, to force yourself to do something you may not really want to do, but nevertheless realize is necessary, or when it's a choice without a real choice, and so on. And so this is essentially our resource. Intellectual and volitional control over impulses, over emotions, over feelings, and ultimately over the urge to strangle someone, to beat someone up, to get divorced immediately, or to get married in half an hour. If we engage this Homo sapiens, yes, the mind, then these two regulators will guarantee the effectiveness of our actions, the effectiveness of our decisions, and our contact with reality.
Speaking of balance, many Ukrainians, and in fact people in general, often live between two extremes. On one hand, you want change, you feel that it absolutely needs to happen, but on the other hand, there's such fear and uncertainty ahead that you end up stuck in the middle. At what point can you feel that now is the time to do something about it?
Look, there's a very clear and straightforward example, and it's commonly referred to as the norm in moderation, which essentially means, for instance, the powerful and often overwhelming feeling of fear. This particular emotion, when experienced in appropriate measure, can indeed be quite constructive and incredibly useful in various situations. Yes, because of fear, we don't jump off balconies and we don't throw ourselves under cars. But if there's too much fear, if the fear is excessive, it becomes an obstacle, because then we're afraid to go out into the world, we're afraid to take any unpredictable actions, we're afraid to interact where other people aren't afraid to interact. So it turns out that if fear is at a normal level, it's our safety, but if there's too much fear, it becomes our limitation and a burden. The same goes for any quality. We can, so to speak, run it through this filter. This is about how, in some places, one polarity, yes, the turbulence of fear, is on one side, and on the other, as you say, is ignorance and thus danger. Right in the middle, being in the middle means not too much, but also not too little. And if we are afraid and therefore go to a shelter and therefore go to a safe place to save our lives, that is an appropriate anxiety, an appropriate fear, and it is the right reaction to danger. But if, while actively escaping from a significant danger, we become completely paralyzed by an overwhelming fear and consequently don't leave the protective shelter at all, then that's precisely when there's far too much fear.
So that's when a proper rational analysis is needed to become aware of the level of fear and the level of desire. What is needed
is what I most often call contact with reality. Because, for example, there are phobias. These are fears that we invent ourselves. Well, for example, agoraphobia, cancer phobia. These are not people who actually have a cancer diagnosis. These are people who are afraid that they have cancer. And then what needs to be done with this fear, with this cancer phobia, is to refute it. It's very simple. Get examined, have proof that you have no signs of oncological pathology, and your phobia will end there. But for this, you need to check the objective reality. And objective reality is the indicators that will either confirm what you fear or refute it. For example, there's also the fear of riding in an elevator. Some people have a fear of enclosed spaces, a fear. Well, in fact, there are hundreds and hundreds of phobias. How to interact with reality? Try, for starters, to ride not from the very top floor of a skyscraper, but just 1 or 2 floors. Nothing happened, right? Again, nothing. Again, nothing. And after some time, this fear will prove itself to be irrational, because there are objective dangers and there are imagined ones.
That is objective external factor statistics, how many people got stuck in an elevator, and your own observations, how many times have I ridden without problems. An
experience. Yes, which gives you something to rely on.
And when it comes to changing jobs, it's the courage that can become the push to suddenly quit your profession, leave your employer, and completely dive into a totally different professional niche.
Look, honestly, I think there are a lot of factors that can be involved in this, a whole lot. There can simply be what's called the last straw mechanism. For example, a person was able to endure it, they accumulated their dissatisfaction, their irritation, but they could still handle it. The resource of containment, yes, and the container wasn't full yet. But then one more, problematic situation, another conflict with the authorities. One more ultimately frustrating circumstance, and they say, that's it, I've had enough. And following the last straw mechanism, they go on to live their new life. There may be the temptation of more attractive opportunities, a more appealing career, or simply following one's own preferences. It could be curiosity. Curiosity, and that's understandable too. I already know this, I've already mastered and experienced it. But there's still something else I can learn, master, and experience. There are also social standards. Why? Because if in the past, in the previous country, it was customary to take pride in dynasties of turners, dynasties of locksmiths, dynasties of lawyers, from great-grandfather to great-grandson, doctors, and this dynastic social normativity served as a model. But in the modern world, if you work in the same place for 20 years, what are you most likely to be asked? What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you? Are you okay?
How is that possible? Doing the same thing for so long, the same thing, not wanting to learn something new or try something else. There can be many factors involved in this.
And if we look at burnout, because burnout often just hangs in the air, along with terms like stress and depression, whether we use them correctly or not is another question, but burnout is often the push that makes people want to change everything. On the one hand, I've heard the idea that burnout is just marketing slang, that maybe it's something made up and maybe it's even beneficial for something. Someone else says it's about meaning, that as long as there is meaning in what you do, and you can find it, burnout doesn't happen. How do you view this concept of burnout? How do you interpret it?
Well, I still consider myself largely an academic lecturer, so for me, a definition of a concept already has an author, already has research, already has evidence, and is not just some everyday version of terminology. And that's why, in fact, the term burnout or psycho-emotional burnout, yes, it comes from the 1980s, from American psychologists, from research on 3 groups: nurses, One group consisted of those who did their job well, fulfilled their duties, and at the end of their shift hung up their coat and went home to live a different life. The second group of nurses were excellent performers, the favorites of all the patients. Overdoers, over-responsible, those who were overly dutiful, overly responsible. All the patients loved them, they fulfilled all their wishes, they stayed after work, they were extremely convenient for their employers, and so on. And the third group, well, the indifferent ones. Yes, those who neglected their duties, those who slacked off, avoided work, made excuses, and didn't do what they were supposed to do. Who do you think out of these three groups was diagnosed with burnout?
The first group?
No, the first group performed their duties in moderation. The second group, it was actually those individuals who consistently overdid it, because they ultimately burned themselves out completely. Yes, they certainly did precisely what was specifically asked of them, but they undeniably did far too much. And when we look at any kind of water safety training, for example, how to save a drowning person, they always warn you not to reach out with both hands, your neck, and everything else, because then you'll end up drowning yourself as well. If you only extend one of your hands, the person in need can grab onto your wrist, and then you can pull them out using your own strength. But for that, you need to be resourceful enough, self-reliant enough, and have solid support. On any airplane, with any airline, the flight attendant always warns you about what to do in case of an emergency. In the event of an air disaster, put on your own oxygen mask first and then help those next to you. Even the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself, not the other way around. And this is exactly a kind of safety marker. If we listen to ourselves, understanding whether we've had enough, whether we have no more strength, whether we can't do more than is required of us, then that should be our break. That should be our emergency stop. I don't have any more strength to go on. If we keep meeting the needs and desires of others, saving them at the expense of our own safety, health, and energy, it ends sadly because we truly become depleted, we exhaust ourselves, and you can't pour from an empty jug. What we are made of is what we will share. If we have strength, energy, satisfaction, and desire, that's what our clients, patients, family, and loved ones will receive from us. If we have fatigue, depletion, and exhaustion, that's what they will get from us as well. And the markers of psycho-emotional burnout are very simple. Depressive experiences, loss of meaning, psycho-emotional exhaustion, not wanting to go to work, not wanting to do even the simplest duties that used to be easy and accessible. Not wanting to communicate with those around you, including your own family members, because that also requires energy, and you've already used it all up, you've already spent it.
Interesting. It's like a feeling of mild nausea when you don't want to take on things you used to do before.
Because it's too much for you, it's unnecessary, it's beyond your strength, it's not the right time for you.
So it turns out that it's important not to miss this moment, the point at which it moves on to a deeper state.
We are living beings, we're not Duracell bunnies, we can't just take out 2 batteries, put in new ones and keep going.
And in a team, when we're talking about this with other people, you can notice, for example, as a manager, that your subordinates are already on the edge.
Yes, absolutely. The first question, which is a universal question for any of our changes, whether positive or negative, is to compare how this person functioned before. If something has changed, because over time each of us has our own, let's say, functional face, competence, and reputation in front of our management or among our colleagues. If you always used to come in cheerful, lively, and energetic, if you always did your work with pleasure or without much effort, and suddenly that's no longer the case, and suddenly you have an exhausted face, and suddenly you get tired from a lighter workload compared to what used to be manageable for you before. That means there is a reason for your changes, there is a reason for your regression. And so we know in today's world which leaders are good leaders, those who have high emotional intelligence. Not just formal intelligence, because formal intelligence is IQ. It's the knowledge you possess, your background, professional competence, and so on. But emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize your own emotional states and the ability to be attuned to the emotional states of others. And so, if an employee has the necessary and sufficient level of emotional intelligence to notice that another person has changed, not physiologically as they look and dress the same, but emotionally they are different, then this means that he is sensitive to that person's emotional state.
That is, we have yet another factor, the responsibility of the manager to also be in a resourceful state and to be able to notice what is happening within the team. Especially when people can't sleep, when there is anxiety, and when the war has such a significant impact on our daily lives. And burnout is accelerating now. Indeed, it is speeding up, because
we are under constant tension. This is something that hasn't had an off button for 3.5 years now. And of course, we may feel more or less safe, and we've already organized everything for that. We have our Telegram channels, we have our alerts from the radar, and all other means of warning about danger. But the war hasn't ended. The war hasn't disappeared. And no part of our country or even the world has any guarantees of safety. Because when they say they're deeply concerned, they're not just deeply concerned about our fate, but also about our future prospects. They're deeply concerned about their own safety as well. And this is what I've called many times before, tacking against the wind. That's right. When we go with the wind's energy gives us strength and speed. When we go against the wind, we have to overcome the force of the wind that's blowing in our faces. And it slows us down, and it feels like an obstacle. And our whole country and all our people have been living with such an obstacle for 3.5 years now. So does it drain us? Yes, it does. Does it exhaust us? Yes, it does. But have we adapted and adjusted to this way of life? Of course we have. Of course we have. And this is where Homo sapiens has particular advantages, because this is an adaptive resource that precisely involves this intellectual and volitional control.
You once said that rituals help a lot with this. Yes, daily practices, everyone has their own.
And the answer is very simple. Stability calms anxiety. Why? Because the unknown is frightening. The unpredictable is frightening. The unforeseeable is frightening. If there is something repetitive, if there is something the same, if there is something, this brings calm because it is what clearly supports me in the future, will support me. And such rituals don't necessarily have to be very complicated or very... But even, for example, why is it not recommended to move or do radical renovations for elderly people? Because if he knows that the cup should be right here, and the comb should be over there, this is my bed and this is my kitchen, and everything is clear. Why? Because this is my safety, which has been the same for decades. But if an elderly person finds themselves in a world unknown to them and new conditioned reflexes are formed in a completely different way, the neurodynamics of elderly people and the neurodynamics of a young brain, these are different neurodynamics, then she will be confused. Then she won't know where her cup is and she won't know where her comb is.
That's an additional stress.
That's why there's even a saying, you don't transplant an old tree. Because a new one will put down roots and adapt to any new place. But an old one won't put down new roots.
And whether it actually takes root is also a question.
Yes, it's a very doubtful one at that.
Very nice. You summed it up so well. I recently observed that businesses, for example, anticipating that various situations might arise within the team and that anxiety is increasing due to challenging external circumstances, are also aware that there are productive tasks that need to be maintained and performance indicators that must be met. And a number of companies are trying to study this internal microclimate to help their employees. And one of the large companies conducted a survey. I'll share this case with you, where they directly asked, do you feel stressed? Stress at work, stress in everyday life, and 50% of respondents answered no. And when management receives such results, they have nothing to offer. There's no need for measures where there's no necessity. And the first thought we came to was that either people are living in some other parallel reality or they're just high. I mean, how can you say there's no stress when it's present every day?
And here we return again to the academic definition. So in their subjective perception, what they call stress is actually something different. For example, it's when you're already going crazy and can't sit still. And if I, Mikola, or I, Olya, or I, Natalia, think that stress is like this, then as long as I don't feel like that, it means I'm not experiencing stress. On the other hand, there's the opposite extreme, and that's the Western world. If you ask a German, this is something I understand and relate to, do you feel any stress at all?
Actually, always.
In calm, predictable Germany, where trams run on schedule, where the future is foreseeable, where you book a doctor's appointment months in advance and you know you'll be seen, where the repairman comes exactly when you scheduled, not today or tomorrow, but at the appointed time, and yet all these people say they experience stress and depression. Our bombings, evacuations, loss of territory, victories and losses, the dead and wounded, the constant flow of information, and yet no stress, none at all. Why? First of all, different people have different sensitivity thresholds. And even when it comes to pain, right? Some people cry out immediately while others just endure and endure. Second, cultural norms. Yes, we have a certain masochistic component, we know how to survive. We may not be very good at living, but we are perfect at surviving. And that's why what seems easy and simple for us is unbearable and unthinkable for them. We remember from our past what always amused us, because in Lviv the water was 6,969, and to imagine the Western world where the water is 6,969. Well, it's cute, but they would go crazy, right? And for us, if you had a party and guests were invited, around 8 in the evening the guests would start stacking the plates, and they knew that if the hostess managed to wash them by 9, the plates would be nice and clean. If not, then that means she would have to wash them in the morning from 6 to 9.
To manage to get everything done before that opportunity appears.
This is exactly that survival skill, meaning such predictability, foreseeability, a guarantee of social protection, social security. We never had that. That's why I always say our neighbors, where there's the Wild East, well, because we know about the Wild West, and now we're lucky enough to have the Wild East, over there they count on Batya Shkutseria for some kind of move. Our neighbors to the west have a rule of law state, the supremacy of law, social protection, social services. We have neither one nor the other. We throw out any czars because conceptually
We are different.
Kozakdom and Makhnovshchina.
Resourceful people, yes.
And as for a rule of law state, for now, in that form, we have no grounds to have one, because there, the first social and liberation revolutions began in the 17th century, or even earlier, while here serfdom was only abolished in the 19th century. So,
We still have a lot to work on.
who do we rely on? Ourselves. And since we rely on ourselves, then these are my problems, these are my resources to overcome them, this is my task that I have to accomplish, and to hope that someone else will do it instead of me, or for me, well, there's really no reason for that.
You summed it up beautifully and also reminded us that we need not only to survive, but to live. One of the questions in this survey was, but what would you still like to see change or be added to the corporate culture? And a quarter of respondents answered corporate events. So essentially, maybe we're starting to want to live again and to allow ourselves a few small celebrations because we've had to give up so much.
This is absolutely understandable as well, because war divides everything into before and after. War separates safety from danger, life from death. And since the risk of losing one's life, the threat and the probability of losing one's life becomes so obviously exaggerated, so much so that it's right there, face to face. In the same way, this amplifies or intensifies the other polarity as well, the thirst for life. And that's why, as we know very well, our defenders, our combatants in large numbers are getting married, falling in love, proposing, and it might seem like it's not the right time, but actually it is exactly the right time, because where the possibility of losing life becomes real, the value of life is also brought to the forefront. And this intention in the second matter, it also needs to be appropriate. That is, their weddings are weddings of meaning, not just form. Their weddings are celebrations of genuine feeling, feelings that have been tested by these unimaginable circumstances. But these are not weddings of pomp, decor, or showiness, it's camouflage attire, or ethnic clothing, or embroidered shirts, isn't it? But these feelings have been tested, and they run deeper than what is simply displayed as markers of status, as markers of some financial level, you know. That's why war is sometimes called a purgatory for the world, because it once again sets the right sequence of priorities, because it once again establishes the true values in the correct order. And the greatest value in life is life itself. And that's why there are many ways to live your life. You can live in despair and burn out, or you can live with satisfaction, faith, and hope. But the only true place in life is simply life itself. That's why we didn't want some other benefits, but rather that very resource. The resource of satisfaction, the resource of optimism, the resource of joy, and that's normal.
And that's normal. It's something you should allow yourself, yes.
Again, not this kind of exaggerated thing. That's just inappropriate right now. Pathos is inappropriate right now. But just genuine, deep, sincere joy, real, sincere satisfaction. Well, that's something that's really, really needed. Understanding.
And are values changing now during the war, or were they perhaps dormant and have now manifested, or can we acquire new values? They change
their hierarchy, they change their priority. And in the first weeks after the start of February 24th, 2022, millions of people were saving their lives, fleeing the country, because no one really knew what war was or how to live through it. No one was taking family heirlooms, antiques from the walls, or luxury clothing from high-end designers with them. They took good warm old boots so their feet wouldn't get sore on the road. They took, 2 warm sweaters, a few t-shirts, some underwear. They tucked their children under their arms, and their pets too, if they were small enough. This means that the greatest values in life, after all, even the latest iPhone with its luxurious design, no, it disappears with a single bomb or a single Shahed drone. But what you really took with you were your loved ones, your family, your documents, because otherwise you couldn't prove who you are, and the money you needed. And
memories, the experiences you have, and most of all,
what did people miss the most? This is something I know from working with clients, from dealing with their requests with those who have left. They missed their family photo albums.
Do people go back to their family albums again?
Yes, their family photo albums. But it's not about the albums as objects. It's about the photos of my life, about my life. Because these are my memories, this is my life, and I can look at them and remember what it was like. I can see myself as a child, I can see my parents, I can see my classmates, because there's an understanding that you'll never be able to do that again. Especially if these are people who left the occupied territories or lost their homes to destruction. They didn't regret leaving behind their dinnerware or display cabinets. They didn't mourn expensive linens or anything like that. No, it was the family photo albums they missed.
Now is exactly the time to digitize your photos and keep such memories. That's true, and
then you won't lose them anymore.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
So this is about how war reshapes the hierarchy of values. But there is another truth, and an artist must understand it well. In dark times, bright people become even brighter, and the dark ones become even darker. And so it's like with any storm, it brings things up from the bottom. The filth, what was invisible. And all those high-profile scandals with thefts, abuses, violations, exploitation, violations, immorality, antisocial behavior. That too has surfaced. Because the bright become even brighter, but the dark become even darker.
Our project's task is precisely to develop tools for
even much easier,
more effective, and more comfortable employment for people with different backgrounds. And experiencing the war is also different for everyone. And sometimes those people in Lviv who are hosting internally displaced persons may feel some guilt because they have gone through less than those around them. And this proper communication, this is also a big issue within a team where everyone has become so different. What advice would you give? So how do you deal with that feeling of guilt at first?
Right now the advice is very simple. In 3 words, tolerance for others. That is what makes the world, that is what forms the foundation of democracy. I am not better than you and not worse than you, I am just different. This is what inclusive education looks like. This is what support looks like for those with developmental disabilities, for those who are injured, for amputees, for people with special abilities, with special needs. They are not worse and not better, they are just different. If we develop this tolerance towards others, if we master it, if we don't use it in any kind of relationship, then we will accept those who are different from us, because it does not mean disrespect or arrogance, but at the same time it also does not mean fighting, condemnation, or fear. The so-called normative approach has already been discussed today. A normative attitude is always something in between. That is, there is no catastrophizing, demonizing, or oh no, oh dear, but there is also no idealization, untouchability, excessive caution, or excessive sensitivity, because that's where emotionally charged relationships arise from. And what we need are sober, balanced relationships. And if we swing too far in one direction or the other, we must remember that we need a healthy middle ground. Yes, this person may have certain limitations, or may even be different from us, perhaps even in appearance. That's why the world has ramps, that's why the world has level spaces, public transportation, and so on and so forth. What do we
call accessibility? Yes?
Accessibility. Why? So that they can be among us and we can be alongside them. That means we need to create comfort both for them and for us by adapting the material, physical world to their limitations and abilities. If you, on the American continent, rush to let a person in a wheelchair go ahead of you,
or else
press the buttons for them, they might feel offended because you treat them as incapable. That's why the button will be at the level of the wheelchair, not somewhere out of their reach. That's why the space will be accessible. And then you are simply different, and they are simply different. But to make a catastrophe out of this, to treat it as something special with excessive caution, delicacy, or reverence, this only serves to separate that person from yourself. And tolerance towards others means accepting them as equals. And this is the correct strategic conceptual approach to the issue. Yes, I take your limitations into account and will try neither to hinder you because of them nor to ignore them. But while considering your limitations, I do not treat you as worse or better in any way. I simply see you as different, because such an approach means equality. Different does not mean above or below. Different simply means on the same level as me, just not the same. And this tolerance toward the other is the foundation of the right attitude. Yes, your experience will never be the same as mine, and mine is not the same as yours. But that doesn't mean better or worse, it just means different. Yes, what you went through deserves my respect and honor, but the people who stayed in the rear worrying about those on the front line, sometimes their experiences were even more intense. Because fear, the fear itself, can be greater than the thing you fear. And why is there an old saying that the calmest place is at the center of a typhoon? Because that's where the waves move on and that's where they're destructive. But where they begin, you can influence it, you can control it. A person can see real danger and try to avoid it, protect themselves, have the skills to organize their own rescue, like trenches, dugouts, bulletproof vests, helmets, and so on and so forth. But we don't see any of that, we don't influence any of it, yet our feelings remain with us. And just like with any imagination, we don't picture everything as wonderful, but rather as terrible. But reality can be different. And that's why it seems that only what people experience at the front is very, very important and significant, while what happens in safe places is not as meaningful. That's not true. Sometimes relatives and loved ones experience things even more seriously and intensely than the people who could actually influence the situation. This isn't to diminish what happens there, but it's also not a disregard for what happens here. And sometimes, forgive me, but those mothers who go gray, or wives who fall ill, or children who flinch, these are also just relatives and loved ones in a place of danger. So is it really that lucky for them? Is it really that good for them in their place of safety? No, because there is someone here who is very, very important to them, and they have no way to influence that person's protection.
It turns out that judgment is needed, your own judgment, to reject someone, and probably denial as well.
Take away both the devaluation and the catastrophizing, and the demonization and the polarization altogether. That over there everything is right and heroic, and here everything is easy and simple. Those who left are this and that, and those who stayed are this and that. And there is no truth in this generalization, no truth in this stigmatization. People are unique, and their experiences are unique too. And that is part of our universality. But as I've already said, people can have different thresholds of sensitivity, different types of nervous systems. Some may have a strong nervous system, while others may have a weak one. For one person, stress might mean the end of the world, while for another, it could simply be that the tram was 6 minutes late. That's why respect for others, tolerance towards others, and understanding that you see the world in your own way are so important. The very first thing we teach students in the first semester at the Faculty of Psychology is about subjective perceptions and objective reality. Here is a glass. But if I ask you, what kind of glass is this? One person will say,
full. Someone will say it's half full with water.
Yes, one will say it's with water, another will say it's transparent, another will say it's modern. But the glass is the same.
But
each of us sees it in our own way.
So how do you learn this? Right now we're talking about changing communication in a team, changing communication in a family, about tolerance, about respect. Can you learn this?
Absolutely. As we said at the beginning, a person is a social being. And our environment shapes us. It forms who we are. And if one goose honks, the whole flock starts honking. This is exactly what emotional induction is, induction by affective states. This is also a mechanism of group induction. So here's the good news. It might seem like bad news that we catch the emotions and experiences of others. But the good news is that just as we can catch negative emotions, fear, anger, resentment, or rage from others, we can also catch positive ones. Joy, calm, inspiration. Because when we go, God, for example, to a funeral, we feel sad and we grieve. But when we go to the theater to see a comedy, we feel cheerful and joyful. In both cases, it's the mechanism of group contagion at work. But in one place, the feelings are minor, and in the other, they're major.
So it turns out that, like fireflies, we need to gravitate toward bright people to balance our emotional state.
And that's why this is truly a case where the mechanism of group contagion can be beneficial. Because if everyone is scared, everyone is frightened, but someone still remains stable, balanced, calm, reasonable, and able to predict, then after a while, this wave of fear or the emotional outburst of others also starts to subside.
Like ripples on water, right? They will spread out. Please tell me, in light of such changes within teams, we see that many companies are starting to offer jobs that, for example, are not typically associated with women, but rather have been considered male professions. And they hope that people who previously never considered such professions will now pay attention to them. What do you think could motivate a woman to enter such a technical, traditionally male-dominated field? What could motivate a man to consider a profession that previously was not typical for him either? Because the labor market will keep changing anyway, and we are looking for those tools that will help both sides.
The truth is very simple. Life is dynamic, the world is dynamic, evolution is dynamic. 100 years ago and now, it's a different world. What's the catch? The thing is, if in the past these changes took millennia or even 100 years, now they're happening at an incredible speed, and it's only going to get faster. Does this mean our ability to influence things isn't great? Because we live in the here and now. And so the world that surrounds us now is the space we inhabit. This is our life. But is it possible by being aware of its advantages and disadvantages to reduce one and increase the other? It is possible. Because my favorite saying is an old Irish one. Life is too short, live it slowly. Because if you rush at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, it's true. In an hour, you'll be 200 kilometers away from where you started. But everything along the way you won't notice. You'll speed past and miss it. You won't see how a flower blooms. You won't hear the babbling of a stream. You won't see a stork landing on its nest or teaching its young to fly. Because you're rushing. And if you rush, it's true, you'll get there faster. And there, where is that? Well, at the end of life. And that's why this is an old Irish proverb. Life is too short, live it slowly. But to imagine now that a person would stop using airplanes, the internet, start walking everywhere, light a candle to illuminate their home, Well, that's also nonsense. Because then we would be maladapted. But I repeat, being able to slow down, to pause, to appreciate the moment, to enjoy the moment, these are important skills. After all, look at all these special technologies for stopping now. They weren't relevant at the end of the 20th century. There were no Pilates, no mindfulness practices, no yoga studios at all. Why? What for? Life was measured, predictable, and foreseeable. Only the numbers of the 5-year plans changed. Even the rain gutter was the same one. Oh sure, we kept hanging on, but the salary was always paid on the 3rd or 4th, and the advance was always on the 20th. Sugar cost 78 kopecks in 1/6 of the world for 30 years. That's it. May 1st, one parade, November 7th, another. And that's how it always was. Now kids in kindergarten check the dollar exchange rate at lunchtime because after lunch it will already be different. Grandmas travel across half the city to the market because at the market it's 5 hryvnias cheaper for a kilo of pork fat. And this unpredictability, this invariance, this so-called entropic nature, it raises anxiety, it increases tension, because if you know what awaits you tomorrow, the day after, and so on, that's why we talked about rituals, you feel calmer. If you constantly have unpredictability, if everything is always uncertain, you're always on edge, you're always scared. And that's why when we talk about the need to maintain this balance between excitation and inhibition, a balance between activity, energy, tone, optimism, competition, achievement, but also the ability to pause in the moment. The ability to make use of, say, the resources of nature. Let the resource be yoga, for example. It's also important to understand that it doesn't suit everyone, because there are 2 ways to break. One way is planned braking, where the stopping distance is longer, but it's safer. Just like we can slow down a car, reduce speed and do it in a planned way. But there's also emergency braking, which kicks in under extreme circumstances. And then it's either tires screeching on the asphalt or the car ends up in a ditch. Because if you brake at high speed, you could lose control with fatal consequences. So remember, it's better to start braking in advance. Yes, the stopping distance will be longer. Moreover, we even clearly see that some Northern European countries, as you undoubtedly know, are actively introducing a 4-day work week, a 4-day one, indeed. Moscow. So what are they doing? They're increasing the braking. Because Friday, Saturday, Sunday, this is the time when you can rest, switch off, engage in other activities, and so on. And here's another life hack, really. It's changing the type of activity. Because it's kind of different, but you're still active, you're still doing something, just not in the same work, not in the same place, not in the same way that made you exhausted or drained. And this method has been used for a very long time. What did all the city dwellers do on Saturday and Sunday? Those who had gardens at their gardens and dakas, those who had villages to go to, those who had none of that went to the Carpathians with tents. What did all the residents of rural areas do on weekends?
They went to the city.
They went to the city, to the circus, to the department store, wherever they wanted, but they changed their usual weekly routine to something completely different. And this completely different activity gave you new energy, not because you just lay on the couch doing nothing, but because you were doing something only in a way that was entirely different from what you had been doing for the previous 5 days.
So it's not about searching for a calling or that your calling has changed and now you have a different profession. It's simply about a different situation, about a predictable result, about new experiences, and again about maintaining that life balance where work should remain work and not spill over into other areas. And the second
component, since you rightly mentioned this gender functionality, is something that started with the suffragettes, the emancipation movement, and continues to this day because now we have a unisex world. If in the past there was women's work and men's work, if there used to be women's clothing and men's clothing, now we are not wearing skirts, not with veils, not in corsets or ruffles. But there are things that are unisex for a reason, because it's more convenient and more comfortable this way, and walking to the bus in panniers and corsets is not exactly a pleasure. But on the other hand, there are cases where unisex is harmful because, as Schopenhauer said more than 100 years ago, when men and women lose their gender distinction, they stop being very attractive to each other. Because if you are like me and I am like you, then what is there in you for me? What about you will not tempt me? What about you will remain mysterious to me? What about you will be unknown to me? And that's why part of this unisex trend, yes, unisex standardization, unisex clothing, unisex jobs, it's simply a process of emancipation, equality, independence, and everything else. And just like any changes, they have their advantages, but you also have your losses. So when it comes to work, you know that, again, in the Western world, sexism is prohibited, ageism is prohibited, everything is banned. And that's why even posting a job ad for a male or female position means that tomorrow you'll be shut down, tomorrow you'll be banned. If you still need, for example, a loader who has to lift heavy loads and the physical advantage of the male body hasn't gone anywhere, and the physical limitations of the female body haven't gone anywhere either. So in the job ad, you can't say that you need a male loader. You have to write in the ad that you are offering a job to people who can lift 20 kilograms.
Always state the objective truth. That is to say,
it's true, but you can't specify gender in the ad. So a woman might come in who can easily lift 20 kilograms and you have no right to refuse her. So these are the kinds of distortions where things go to the other extreme. I understand that for millennia, society and the world have leaned toward patriarchy, toward male dominance. And even now, we don't even have our own last names.
That's why
when a woman says, "I'm keeping my own surname," in reality, it's still her father's surname.
there's no real choice. It just looks like there is.
If she marries, her surname is either her father's or her husband's.
Yes.
And something from that time of male dominance still remains, for example, our last names. That's true.
That's true. But
something has still shifted in the other direction. And in this other direction, sometimes unfortunately, it's just that the pendulum never stops in the middle. If its amplitude swung plus 100 in one direction, then it can just as easily swing minus 100 in the other. That's what evolutionary development looks like. And in order for it to end up in the middle, it has to visit both poles. And then if we reach that place of a healthy middle ground, whether it's truly about gender equality or this kind of truly unisex, unified and functional approach, meaning absolutely no sexism, no ageism, and none of the other discriminatory practices, in order to effectively reach this healthy, balanced middle ground, we absolutely have to thoughtfully go through both extremes of the spectrum.
That's very true. Let's take some of the weight off this situation. It's worth trying, and then you can see for yourself how comfortable you feel in that role.
Here's another one of my favorite sayings. Knowledge is power, but change is action. And in order to see that, we can memorize the swimming manual by heart. But will that make us able to swim? No. We truly learn to swim only when we get into the water and start taking action. We can memorize how to drive a car or how to ride a bike by heart. Will we gain balance from that? No. Only when we actually get on that bike, turn the handlebars to the right and fall over. But we remember, turning right is not allowed. Then we turn left and fall again. But we remember our body and muscle memory, turning left is not allowed either. And then finally, we develop a sense of balance with the handlebars. But not as a result of knowledge, rather as a result of action.
You've led me perfectly to my next question about women who are on maternity leave or caring for children. Sometimes it seems to them that they are not doing anything. They are happy in their motherhood, in their new role, in their new self-expression. But from the perspective of professional activity, what will happen afterwards? Will I still be needed? Will I be useful? Will the knowledge I had at a fairly high level just disappear? This feeling of degradation and again the fear that I am inactive now, that I am fading away. What advice can be given?
This is
the very truth that has been repeated.
It's an absolute mistake. In fact, everything is very, very clear at this point. I explain to women, and I am one of them myself, that there are duties which are a priority. Today we've already talked about hierarchy, about priorities, and about everything else that has age restrictions. If you can build your career from the very beginning to unlimited heights, why is that? It depends on the profession. Teachers teach until
an extremely, really advanced age.
For example, all my authorities, my entire iconostasis, not just names in the world of psychotherapy. There's Irvin Yalom, 90+. Then Otto Kernberg, 90+. Nancy McWilliams, 90+. Our head of the Academy of Sciences, Peyton, 102. And Holovasivitla. Why do some organs work much longer, and so on and so on. So you will have time for this, but reproductive function has its limits. And reproductive function only exists during the fertile age. And the fertile age, before 20, we are not yet giving birth or leaving offspring. From 40 and up, we no longer leave offspring. That's why you have a certain period in your life, a certain stretch of life, during which you have to manage to do what you won't be able to do later. And if you understand this well, like a hen leads her chicks around the yard, but only when they're still yellow fluff balls. Later, when they're already grown, running around on their own looking for bugs and seeds, they don't need the hen anymore. So, if a mother bets everything on motherhood alone, then indeed she'll end up clinging to her children when they're no longer those little yellow chicks. Because it's as if she doesn't know any other purpose for herself. Yes, in the past, when a woman gave birth to 10, 12, even 18 children, that's how it was. At 16, she was married off, and then as many as God gave, sometimes up to 50 if God willed it. And that was her main purpose. But even then, no one relieved the woman of any of her other duties, because she still had to milk the cow, just as before. Because remember, Shevchenko's mother gave birth to a son, swaddled him, and then went back to the harvest. And motherhood is not a novelty of the 21st century. The novelty of the 21st century is that motherhood has somehow become very different from what it was for millennia. And that doesn't mean that those mothers didn't love their children. They loved them, but their lives were separate from the world of children, once the children were autonomous and independent enough to take care of themselves. Unfortunately, the modern world in the 21st century is experiencing a crisis of the institution of the family, both vertically and horizontally. And that's why mothers really feel that they have lost something, that they used to live a different life where there was no child, and now they live another life where their adult functionality is missing. And even in your childhood, and even more so in mine, the world of children was still separated from the world of adults. Because when you are very little, your mother is always nearby, and that's natural. The hen is also nearby when the chicks are small. She needs to cover them with her wings. But when you learned, as you say, learn to walk, to eat by yourself, and so on, you had kindergarten, where your mother was no longer there. And you developed the skill of socialization, of self-reliance. And then when you went to school, that was it. No, that was already the adult world, which was your responsibility. Your responsibility. There were no mobile phones, no means of control. The world didn't have or know about them back then. Moms and dads would go at 9 in the morning to build communism, like 1/6 of the world. At 6 o'clock they would return home. And how your life looked after school until that 6 o'clock was your responsibility. And if you hadn't written down your homework, it was up to you to run to your classmates to find out what it was. And if you had to do your homework, that was your responsibility. And you did it before your mom and dad came back, not after they returned. And this autonomy, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, and maturity existed for millennia and was called initiation. Only in ancient tribes, initiation meant that fathers took young boys with them on hunts and taught them to become adult hunters. Mothers took little girls with them wherever they went. And they taught them everything a woman should know, be able to do, and perform. And our initiation was the delegation of the responsibility that was entrusted to us, and no one else took it away from us. Now there are groups for moms on Viber. What homework did we get? Who is we? If the homework was given to your children, then there should be groups for children who need to know what they were assigned. But it's not the mom who comes home from work and the child is waiting for her to do the homework with them. The moms weren't assigned the homework. It was assigned to you. That's exactly why, from the moment a child can go to school, there is a special purpose. It's precisely so that this external locus of control becomes internalized. They start going to school at 4. The optimal age actually is 7. Because by then, a child can already manage what is their responsibility using their own resources. Awareness of intellectual and volitional abilities. And then the world of adults lived its adult life, and the world of children lived its childhood life. And that's where your autonomy, your independence, your self-reliance were formed, because that was your responsibility.
So beautiful. Mothers don't worry. They are living through their new experiences, their new values, some challenges, and they need to be confident that everything is working out for them.
Absolutely. Because then you return to what you already knew and could do. That's always easier than learning something new from scratch. you already have additional life wisdom, you have extra knowledge of multifunctionality, because when you're at home, cooking, taking care of a small child, handling a bunch of other responsibilities, communicating and being responsible for other family members, it increases your multifunctionality. And this multifunctionality later becomes your resource. Because the main fear women have with maternity leave syndrome, well, that's the official name for it, is when you return to work after maternity leave, you wonder, how will I manage everything now? But she was already busy with things to do during those 24 hours at home. So where is she supposed to fit in an additional 8-hour workday now? But it turns out that this experience of being multifunctional, which she developed during her maternity leave, actually gives her the ability to add that 8-hour workday on top and still manage her household duties. So it's simply the next level. It's just the next stage of your capabilities.
And what do you think when a woman is, in fact, in a certain kind of isolation or separation, which of course can be compounded by the immigration experience? Are these similar processes to what our immigrants go through?
Absolutely. Why? Because in both cases there is a sense of loss. Only here, it's about the woman's social status, right? Her social roles, responsibilities, functionality, career opportunities, and she has to give those up for a while. For immigrants, the losses are different. Yes, the loss of your homeland, the loss of a familiar environment, the world where you were born and raised, a world that is predictable, foreseeable, familiar, and known to you. And according to the laws of loss, in both cases, you have to go through it. The difference is in the intensity. As we've already said, if the loss of a woman's professional functionality is temporary, then emigration can turn out to be a loss for a lifetime. It can also turn out to be temporary. Yes, as we say, we even call our category of these modern displaced people, well, temporarily displaced persons. And even when their stay is extended for some period, they don't call them refugees. They don't say these are people who will just stay in those tents and never return to their hotspots. They say that this is a temporary status for them. Non-permanent. But what's good about this temporariness is that a person doesn't have this sense of fatalism, that things will never be the way they were before. They have hope as a resource. They have faith as a resource. And that's something you can rely on. But will they still have to go through this loss as a loss? Absolutely, because the world that surrounds them is different from the one they grew up in. And we've already talked today about that old tree that you don't transplant, right? Because if it's little kids, in just a few months in a new environment, they build new relationships, make new friends, and pick up the language, because language is a function. It's from ages 2 to 5. And at that age, it doesn't really matter to you which language to learn or which language to pick up. As long as you know what a table is called, what your friend is called, what your toys are called. But an adult has already formed their national identity, their mental identity, and their social identity. And that's why there are more than 100 events on the list of traumatic events in a person's life. And so, immigration was among the top 5 most traumatic events, war was among the top 5 most traumatic events, and divorce was among the top 5 most traumatic events. So right now, we have all the trump cards, the whole jackpot. And if it's easier to get through a single loss because you still have other supports, then when you lose many supports, there's nothing left to lean on. I explain this to people metaphorically. It's like a chair. If it has 4 legs and one is wobbly, you can still sit on it. But if 2 legs are wobbly, you can no longer sit on that chair because it has no balance. Accordingly, if you've unfortunately lost 3 crucial legs, you either have to bravely stand firmly on your own 2 feet and diligently look for another supportive chair, or you absolutely have to thoroughly go through it and truly find your very own unique way to adapt and proactively discover brand new opportunities. New roles, social roles, professional roles, functional roles, and that will take time. It will take time. But again, the good news is that everything we know and can do in life is something we've learned. We are born with 3 unconditional reflexes. The grasp reflex, the sucking reflex, the swallowing reflex. That's it. We learn to walk, we learn to talk, to drive a car, to take care of ourselves, to go to school. All of that is something we've learned. To acquire new knowledge and new skills, you need 2 things. The first is to want it. The second is to do something about it. We've already said that knowledge is power, but change is action. and if there are motivated immigrants who are ready to adapt, ready to learn a new language, ready to master new professions, ready to build a new environment, a new network, then that will be the most optimal way. And that's why out of the 5 strategies that exist for adaptation in immigration, acculturation, marginalization, and so on, the most correct one is integration. When you don't renounce yourself, you don't completely lose what is yours, because it's impossible to lose yourself. That's not what will make you happy. But to what you already know, can do, and possess, you add something new. And if this balance between what you can rely on from your past, from your former self, from your past life, and what you are still mastering, still able to do, still learning is maintained, then you have something to lean on, then you once again have those 4 legs under your chair.
And where is it worth starting when it comes to restoring social connections?
With searching for a reference group. A community that can be, this is why our immigrants mostly gather around Ukrainian churches, or Ukrainian communities, or interest clubs, or dance groups, singing groups, choirs, and so on. Because that will be those 50% from your past. But at the same time, they go to language classes, they go out, they have new opportunities, for example, and all these social centers abroad help them find employment, help them find an environment that can be resourceful, because there is a part of your past that you can rely on, but you also need new friends. You still need to connect with neighbors in your new home, and the neighbors speak English, German, Czech, Polish, and if you try to connect in your own language, it will seem somewhat inappropriate, but if you connect in their language, it will be appropriate. And so on and so forth. That is, building a network, building this new web of communication, learning the language as much as possible, without the illusion that we will ever speak a foreign language like native speakers. But one of my favorite jokes is about which language is the most popular in the whole world. Do you know which one? The most widespread, the most commonly used. Bad English. Because native speakers have good English. Everyone else who learned it as English as a second language, they speak English as a second language, and there are more of them than anyone else. Because these are all the immigrants who moved to English-speaking countries, all those people who learned the international language in order to communicate, but it's not their native language. And that's not fatal, it's not a bad thing. Why? Because you have a language that you speak perfectly, a language in which you talk, dream, and communicate with your family and loved ones. This is the language that is the language of your life. And my favorite saying by another German philosopher is actually about one's native language. Your native language is a homeland that is always with you, because you can move to any other country, but when you speak the language that is your own, that is your homeland, the language of your homeland, the language of your life, your childhood, your ancestors, and so on. And wherever you are, you carry this homeland with you. But if you marginalize yourself, if you encapsulate yourself, if you remain only in your past, in your memories, in your regrets, in your despair and suffering, you won't adapt to the world you find yourself in now. You won't adapt to the world that surrounds you. And that's why this balance of what makes you who you are, not renouncing, not rejecting, not denying yourself, but adding to it what you will have to learn in this new world.
And we remain among our own, but you also become one of those whom you once considered strangers. Okay, great advice. Thank you, really. And if you could choose a superpower or a super ability, which one would you pick for yourself? And what would your first day with these new abilities look like?
You know, I might seriously consider upgrading what I already possess, because my deeply held conviction is that the true superpower and the most significant ability is indeed called responsibility. And if a person truly possesses these remarkable qualities, they can indeed achieve a great deal. They can accomplish a significant amount, and they can certainly handle a lot with them. And responsibility is a marker of a mature personality. But it's not some kind of burden, a heavy load. It's simply about being able to say I want or I don't want. I agree or I object. And for me, this is actually a kind of superpower, maturity, personal maturity. And in this new super quality or new superpower, it's not really new for me, I would say. It's more like an upgrade. Or I would add the word assertiveness. Because assertiveness is a very important kind of personal resilience, a strong personal stability. which truly helps you to effectively withstand violence, aggression, and any violations of your personal boundaries. But not through some kind of conceptual egoism, like I am the only one and the main one, but through the strength of your own personality. Again, I don't think so. I don't agree with that. I think differently. And I think this thing helps a person overcome any obstacles and challenges in life.
I think a lot of people would agree to have such a superpower. Thank you, Ms. Larysa, for such a deep and meaningful, wonderful conversation. And I am convinced that many people will be able to find in your words a superpower, super resilience, and a new source of support.
And thank you, because I just remembered one more thing. I won't mention the specific name of that particular theologian right now, but it's a profound saying that I truly really like and find quite insightful. Because I spoke about strength, and that's why this quote came to mind through association. It's truly about the delicate balance between essential justice and genuine kindness. Because if it's just justice, which can sometimes be quite harsh, often categorical, and frequently uncompromising, it can at times be experienced as a form of violence. But if it's just kindness, it can be experienced as helplessness and powerlessness. But when these two qualities come together, when it's about justice and strength, but also with kindness, this is probably the most optimal way to interact with other people, with the world, and with yourself as well.